Without any further waiting, we are going to switch into the eyes, into the head and neck region a bit. And it's an often kind of forgotten area in antenatal diagnostics. And some clues, and I have simplified and improvised on keeping this short, so I will be very much keen to finish in 15 minutes or so to catch up on some time. But most important aspect of the first slide is this last line, and all the various people who have contributed to this journey of understanding a little more about those little eyes in the fetus, which I think begs the first question. When you open a fetal scan, many a times people do not remember that, we are trying to get to precision diagnostics. The eyes will predict the brain, and the brain will predict the eyes. And I think there is a connection there with the inner ear structures as well, which was beautifully illustrated earlier on. But the World Health Organization reminds us this year with the slogan Healthy Beginnings and Hopeful Futures. So it's very important to not miss out on picking up these subtleties. The first question that begs, therefore, is, do you see me? Are they even present? Are they bilateral and symmetric? What is your simple checklist? What do the eyes normally look like? Do they have a bit of a windswept appearance? Are they symmetrical? This is a kind of normal shape. What does that mean in the context of a fetus? This is not a distortion of the image. And then when you have the bits and pieces, to follow a very simple process, to even look at the lens, the vitreous, and there is some basic biometry that will help you establish the fact that this is hypo or hyperteleoric to start with, which has a small list of differentials attached to it. The eyes develop very quickly, and the only reason to show you this beautiful illustration from Harun, who is one of the leading medical illustrators, also a radiologist par excellence, is to just show you the rapidity with which the development of the eye happens. Pretty much within 4 weeks of boy meets girl successfully, this is a cascade of events, and up to the 8 weeks, you have what looks like pretty much the adult eye. So there's quite a rapid development, and any genetic, any environmental toxic insult during this time will affect the eyes, will affect the brain, and will affect the rest of the small structures as well, particularly the inner ears. Again, beautifully illustrated by Susan earlier on in this afternoon or this morning. You're looking at the interocular distance, the binocular distance, two simple measures. And if there is hypertelorism, then we are talking about something that is over 95th percentile. And in the context of hypoteluric states, as in this case of an alobar holoprosencephaly, the interocular distance is basically below the 5th percentile. And these measures can be charted. You don't have to remember any numbers as such. You can just match it on a template reporting, which is available through the SPR and many other organizations. We will be sharing it at the end of this session in terms of how you report a fetal scan. But once you have determined that these are widely separated or too close together, there is a list of differentials you can start thinking about or even put on your report if you want to. But we are dealing with a set of possibilities here, and we can direct further imaging analysis to these grounds and to these ground truths, basically. At its basis, if there is just rudimentary structures or even a frankly anophthalmic state, the question is it still could be primary or a secondary phenomenon. Small eyes, but small eyes associated with other abnormalities like colobomas, for instance, drive you down other list of differentials. And once you start putting syndromes into your neurons, you start looking for the associated findings in the brain. But remember, just like any other part of the body, you have to follow a systematic approach, just as you would do in the postnatal or even kind of early childhood settings. These structures can be systematically approached if you were to think about 3 spaces, 4 compartments, and 3 apertures, and you will get to the bottom of the differential. The problem is the differentials can be quite wide, and we will look at that spectrum when we talk about the cystic abnormalities, for instance. But the first message out there is eyes are present, eyes look okay or not, we'll come back to later, but make sure that once you have established that there's a problem with the eye, you instantly start looking at the brain. In up to 90% of cases with ocular or globe abnormalities, you will discover a concurrent brain malformation. It'll be important to know the gestational age, and it'll be important to know, if possible, not always possible, to know if there were environmental triggers like toxins, for instance, as the baby was developing. So the first instance here is of a recent case that we came across in our hospital, and you've seen a few examples of these. I just wanted to show to you that detection can be difficult unless you're really thinking about it. This came through neurosurgery. So the sieve was totally focused on an occipital encephalocele, which the surgeons knew that they had to repair. The mother wanted to proceed and had proceeded with the pregnancy. So they were already planning the anatomical distortion that was being created by the occipitoencephalocele in this case. And the question that was kind of put forward to the radiologist was, what is the abnormality? What is the vascular abnormality? How safely can we proceed? Because we are waiting for this child to be born. But in the midst of all that, when you start looking at a problem with a defect posteriorly, and of course, a bit of brain kind of herniating and protruding through that gap, you start looking at the rest of the brain. It's got an odd shape. You look at the brain stem. Some people call it the S shape. Some people call it the Z shape. You can call it whatever shape. It's abnormal. And then, of course, it's harder to comment on what's happening with the cortex. Apropos to the gestational age, this cortex looks abnormal, at least to start with. And then you go back to the eye, and definitely there's a problem with one of the eyes here, the other looking a little bit less remarkable, but there is a problem on one side. So, well, we may not have got to the bottom of this, but depending on the shape of the brainstem, you might even engender a guesstimation or an educated guess, at least, of what this might end up being. We do have the very early day one kind of scan where the surgeons were more keen on sharpening their tools in order to get this brain back to as much position as they could. But I think this picture tells you the rest of the story. And this is indeed a case of an alpha dystroglycanopathy, which cobblestone cortex all the way through. This is a muscle eye brain kind of spectrum. Remember, when you have an occipital encephalocele of this nature, the brain generally appears to be pulled backwards, but this distortion of the brainstem is much more than you would expect with just an isolated encephalocele. And the diagnosis was confirmed to be an aspergillus And you will see this one entity basically in a lot of cases, and we have some companions from friends and colleagues where different manifestations of a similar spectrum can be encountered. But it's important to focus on looking at the brain and the morphology of the brainstem in different planes, along with the associated other findings. This, of course, we had a definite mutation with the muscle eye brain confirmed as well in a case from Philadelphia. Companion case, once again, of a child with, well, a fetus with a hypotelluric state. So we have established the hypotellurism. And if you remember the first slide, you will remember there's a short list of differentials to consider. Now, the gestational age will tell you whether the cortex is folded correctly or not, but the focus here is on the eyes, and then you look at the posterior fossa. There is a problem with the hindbrain formation. The shape of the cerebellum is a bit abnormal, and then you have this large cystic kind of presence out there. You will need the full imaging set here to kind of look at the other structures, look at what is happening to the rest of the corpus callosum. It is present in this particular case, but this is the spectrum one would encounter in the context of trisomy 13, where the summarized version on this companion case at 21-week gestation would be a dandy walker. Phenomenology, won't call it a malformation yet. Sometimes these can change over the course of the time duration that these children are scanned. This kid, of course, has frank anophthalmia, and then there is a callosal dysgenesis as well. And I have switched from calling things as frankly agenesis of corpus callosum to dysgenesis after having heard Dr. Taranath's talk so many times where he talks about commissural dysgenesis or agenesis rather than an isolated ACC, basically. Here's a case from David Mirsky's beautiful publication a few years ago on orbital abnormalities, and I quite like this case because this is a finding we sometimes tend to overcall. There might be an undulation of the ventricular margins, but I think Gabrielle showed some beautiful cases. When it is very extensive, it's easy, but they detected this little nodular heterotopia. There are a few more on the contralateral side. And you can see that there is a frank dysgenesis of the corpus callosum here, and go back to the eyes. This is the context of a fetal Aicardi syndrome. And Aicardi syndrome, to the best of my knowledge, still doesn't have a gene. So we wonder, and I'm beginning to wonder, if this is some kind of a clastic process that hits the brain in early embryogenesis. Otherwise, hopefully by now, with the advances in genetics, we would have got something out of those tests. For the companion cases, this one is showing what has been published quite wonderfully as a telephone receiver sign, and that's the clue. But look at the problem with the eyes. This is, of course, faces. And on the other hand, when you start looking at tags, what looks like a pinner, you might actually work up on a 3D kind of arrangement and start picking up skin tags of odd descriptions. This particular second case, of course, is that of an oculocerebrocutaneous syndrome. So you picked up the problem, you went back, you saw the eyes were abnormal, and then you saw this kind of clefting happening. Now, this is a bit open. The jury is out there. Is this going to become a polymicrogyria? Is this a clastic process? By itself, it's hard to tell, but there is definitely a problem. You don't have normal lamination, which was beautifully demonstrated in the previous cases, also in the contralateral side here. Clearly, there's a malformation of cortical development to go with this syndrome here. So the summary of that was, if you have detected the eyes are there and if they are abnormal, go instantly to the brain and start matching up things. The second is cystic masses. This is a problem area because you can give a list of differentials and one of those is going to be true. These are three different cases out here, standard static images. One of them is definitely going to be true. You're going to call this either a lymphatic malformation, or you have to be worried about a teratomatous growth, or depending on the location, you call it a dacrocystocele. But remember, that whatever you say has big implications at the end of that process. So first of all, the first case was initially scanned at an early gestation of 27+3, an Irish family, a large cystic orbital mass. This is a case from UCLH. Kelly will remember quite well. We had a lot of discussion between the two hospitals because the ophthalmologists and the pediatricians are at Gosh, and the other center was involved instantly. And of course, a wide differential could be entertained. The problem is with whatever differential that was offered, the family, of course, for cultural reasons, wanted to continue, but they were left in this situation of which of the above, forget about the diagnosis, but what are the options that are available? So there's a big implication, a big humane side to fetal medicine, which we can see a lot of cases and learn about, but we also need to think about the next level in terms of the impact of what we end up doing in terms of these anxious parents who it might be a precious pregnancy, or they might be pregnant for the first time, or there might be so many other social factors to consider. And while you're still even wondering what might be the best option here, one of the things that could be done is masterful expectancy, watchful expectancy, and to do nothing and just wait and repeat, because time is the biggest teller. And in this particular case, this lesion basically starts devolving itself into more solid elements over time, quite a dramatic change. No intervention was done. But in the discussion and the development of the passage of time, we decided to repeat the scan. You can see that the cortex of the brain, etc., is developing quite well in the background. This child was delivered. They were close to term by this point in time. This is day one imaging. As expected from the imaging, there's not going to be much function in that eye anyways. But the question really was, what is this still? And the pathologist said that, okay, you have a differential, you think it's a teratoma, but if you give us the fluid, that won't give us the answer. We need more tissue than that. We can't really differentiate between a lymphatic malformation from the fluid itself. And the management strategies could be quite different. So anyway, a scan was repeated in the postnatal period. The power of postnatal imaging, if there's a luxury around it, is so important, as we all know. And here we were able to prove that there were some fatty elements, there were some teratomatous elements, and a procedure that was done was basically removing the entire content of that. This was not going to be a functional eye. The other side looked well, the brain looked well, and the diagnosis was a mature teratoma with no yolk sac components. And it's good to have a mature teratoma if you were to choose between a mature or immature one. The child actually lives on, does well. And this is kind of from the hospital notes. I kind of flicked just the statement, the discussions with the parents. And at the age of 2, this little child basically says that the mother feels this child is, children grow up quite quickly when they go through difficulties in early life. And this is quoted, she's starting to note a difference between the two eyelids, and now she's basically going through a prosthesis kind of procedure. And this child is ready to get on with life, basically. But the outcomes could have been quite different and dramatic had we just jumped to conclusions and not involved parents in the decision making. Depending on where you're in the world, I think that might be quite tricky, because sometimes parents might leave everything to the doctors to decide, and that is a very big responsibility. Good. We talked about cystic masses. This is the other set of the first of three that I showed to you. The location of this is very typical. This is a case from Ozgur himself, who was then in Doha, but now back at home in Izmir. A good story coming up from him as well later on. And this is a dacrocystocele, as it's typically located where it is. And in fact, most of these could be quite benign entities, but look quite dramatic. Can be diagnosed on ultrasound itself. We don't do much ultrasound ourselves, so our armamentarium is mostly MR based, but here's an ultrasound that Ozgur did kind of very nicely give to me. And there was a spontaneous resolution, and you can see that there are some skin folds left. The child doesn't look very happy. They generally don't do anyways at that age. But overall, good outcomes in terms of a very non-invasive kind of approach to this dacrocystocele. And ultrasound is so beautiful in showing the dynamicity of where it's originating from. And these are some of those entities which could be missed as well on ultrasound. So there could be medical legal implications. So make sure that you correlate your MR with ultrasound on a regular basis. Okay, and just to kind of close in on these cystic lesions, this is indeed one of those transspatial lymphatic malformations, and sometimes you can have more solid appearing components with them as well. And this is an example of a lymphatic, this is an example of a venolymphatic malformation, but very distinct from everything else. And the one thing to mention here is whenever you have these, always go back to look at the skull base as much as you can on the MR, because we have been caught out, called something lymphatic malformation when they had a basic large encephalocele, which I don't have an example of here to show to you, but an important differential to consider. Also, cystic is this, and this could be picked up in the antenatal setting. We are trying to discover a lot more congenital tumors. I think Susan Blazer and I were having a discussion about why is the detectability of congenital tumors still low in fetal parlance. But of course, this is a postnatal scan of a child with optic nerve glioma in the context of NF1. But I'm sure if we had a good fetal MR, this would have been visible before they were born. But that's my assumption. My final talk part here is the focal lesions, and I would like to show you three different examples. Once again, these are focal lesions where everything else looks okay, but there is a problem there. And this is a very beautiful image from Camilo's group, who I think at the moment is busy working. It's very hard to give a differential instantly when you see a focal lesion like that, but the contrast which is intrinsic to the eyeball there would tell you that there is a problem, and the context becomes important. So the first one essentially was also visible on ultrasound, leads to an MR. It's followed up. There was a high risk in the family here of retinoblastoma, which is what this eventually, unfortunately, turns out to be. But this is what a retinoblastoma would look like. Now, I don't have the diffusion images. I don't know if the resolution would have been good enough to show a diffusion restricting lesion. I'm sure it would have helped if we had all that right at the word go. But if you know that there is a family at risk, if there is a mutation floating in the family, make sure you have a low threshold to keep a very, very close eye on cases like these. The companions of these would be entities like retinal astrocytic hamartomas, again, the context of NF1 or tuberous sclerosis. You will not see another CT in this conference today, but I just wanted to show you that, we are always wondering how to image calcium on a fetal scan. There was a discussion around it. We are also wondering how to image fat in the spine on fetal imaging, and we are still trying to improve on those entities. But yeah, well done if you can pick up any of these on a fetal scan and at least follow it up very closely. This is more of your regular thing where you can have a persistent fetal vasculature just appearing as a line on a fetal scan. And you start wondering about other entities as well, but the importance of postnatal imaging is severely stressed on these. And I did tell you I have cut down my talk to kind of keep within the time, so I'm going to pause there.